Okay. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to my panelists for being here. So, Escaping the Innovator's Dilemma. Just by show of hands, Clayton Christensen's book, 97, The Innovator's Dilemma. Anyone? Interesting. One. So if you think about disruptions and people that are driving it, and even the regulatory climate around it, which is the framing of our panel today, disruptions, people, and regs. Clayton Christensen in 97 wrote a book that is really a seminal business book of how do you disrupt yourself when you're already successful, or how do you just create disruptions? Because before the 90s, technology wasn't there, very large companies were entrenched, and nobody really thought that anything could change. But he wrote a book that really changed people's minds about how you do disrupt yourself, or from the outside disrupt in. So my panelists here, Mohammed, Maurizio, and Georgie will take us through the day. I'm going to start with Mohammed, who is Mashreq, obviously, and I think many here would know corporate banking, commercial banking, retail, and consumer. So Mohammed, in terms of disruptions, and you are CIO, CTO, in charge of transformation, whatever that means. Do you know what that means?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, that's a good start. So just how do you think about disruptions and driving it from your franchise perspective, day to day and long vision?
Thanks, Brett. Thank you. And glad to be here and share some thoughts. Disruption is necessary to have, right? Because if someone said, recently I was with the McLaren team at the F1, and they said if you don't change, you die, right? And if you don't change, or if you stand still, you die. So innovation, disruption, movement is essential, right? And it's been a journey between the banking industry, let's call it, or high industrialized banking sector, and how do you innovate, right? You're given that trust, but then how do you introduce innovation equitably and fast? If I remember 5-6 years ago, I was sitting mentoring, maybe evaluating some fintechs, and we've gone in the last 6 years to being a learner, an integrator, and a partner. And we had to do that shift, right? So a couple of years ago, a lot of fintechs would come for mentoring, understanding the regulatory landscape. A few years later, where's the POC? Where's the sandbox? How do I integrate with you? I know we're going to talk about regulation later, but that plays a big part of it. And I think, just to summarize, you got to play on all parts. So we have knowledge and capability to innovate as a bank, but we need to do a few things. Number one is invest in fintech, or invest in congruent capabilities that come into the bank. We have partnerships in terms of just fintech and innovation. And the third is banking as a service, because as a bank, we have to reach through telco, we have to have reach through other partners and platforms. So the whole integration with banking as a service has to come in with a level of innovation and change.
Right. So a full stack view, but partners in, and really understanding that risk, but managing it together. So I'd even argue you have to move forward to stand still, because things are moving no matter, which is challenging. Standing still is definitely going backwards. So Maurizio, we've talked about partnerships, and from your perspective in the capital markets, institutional space, which is a bit different and more global, I guess, how do you think about the disruptions from your perspective facing clients, looking up, down, and over to the tech teams?
So look, we have to be agile in our approach to technology. We have to decide what is intellectual property, what is IP, what is better that we build ourselves, like algos for market making and servicing our clients. What is better that we borrow? Before, banks were broken up in silos, and you would build technology but not know what your neighbor had and not make it scalable across the bank. So we're borrowing a lot more, and I think that's one initiative that helps save a lot of money, and also you just have to adapt it to that asset class. Then the other is that our quants and tech experts are a lot more open now to buy when it can be cheaper, the product is commoditized, and the time to market is important, especially when we need to deliver a service for regulation or a product for our clients.
So you're seeing the mutualization, the acceleration to the action, and those partners are key even in the bigger markets. So Georgie has written a great book, Stratospheric, about individuals in our space that have disrupted quite a bit over decades. So just on that point, Georgie, disruptions, what about the how, in terms of what you've learned by, speaking to many leaders who have built big platforms in our space?
Yeah, and if I could touch on what was the genesis of the book, because I was a practitioner in the industry for a couple of decades, and what I observed was several visionary leaders who left the traditional finance market and moved into financial technology. And there's a huge risk that comes with that because you're leaving reputational capital, you're leaving job security, so the risks, the stakes are high. And yet I saw these leaders who I was fascinated by because they took that risk. There was a belief that they could see the unmet future that others yet couldn't see. And they were solving things and problems that, again, others didn't think were addressable. And what's really interesting is people would look at these leaders who have revolutionized markets, disrupted industries, and they would call them crazy. They would say, you know what, there is no possible way that that is achievable. And yet, if we look at history, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, there's that fine line between brilliance and what others would define as crazy. So it is the vision, but I think what really came up for me in the book Stratospheric CEOs, yes, it's about having a bold vision, but it's also about rigorous execution and measuring yourself against that execution plan. So it's clear strategy, long vision, and then short execution.
And so we'll move a bit to the people side and continue with Georgie. So we've talked a bit about the how. The stakes are high, for no doubt. Crazy usually means it just hasn't been done.
Yeah.
That would be my argument. But what about, in your learnings, the who, in terms of the types of individuals and the character that they've had to drive these changes?
I'm going to speak to the character, but first I'm going to speak to people, because no one's an island. And I think what really struck me with these leaders is they've assembled a world-class team around them. Because there's one thing to have a great vision, but then you've got to, that concept, but then you've got to implement it. And you can't do that alone. So there's something, and whether these individuals magnetize extraordinary other leaders to them, or whether they've created that, but one leader said, I hire the Avengers, which means I'm an inch of an expert on every aspect of my business, but I'm not the expert. I have the go-to people. So it's having those execution jockeys, which is critical. Having people who'll get shit done, but get things done, I think is incredibly important. And with that execution, it is then measuring yourself against that execution plan. Because it's one thing to say we're focused on execution, but having a plan and making sure there are proper metrics that you're measuring yourself against rather than vanity metrics. And the thing about when you execute, and you execute well, if we think of investors, we think the board, if we think of your clients, they want to know that you do what you say and you say what you do. So I think that encourages confidence in you because it's like there's a track record. And I think the key thing with execution is as well, people want to be part of a winning team. So it's going to attract more people into your organization, which ultimately then drives even greater execution.
Yeah. Investors want that. Employees want that as well. And they want to know. So you need those Avengers to help you drive change, even as a Superman. Being a reform banker myself and knowing maybe banks don't always have those teams to be assembled easily. So Maurizio, from your perspective, when you think about that collection of people that can drive change, how do you think about that sort of up to leadership, down to the operation, all across the board?
I mean, I think tying it back to what Georgie said, I think it's very important. You need to trust each other. Trusting the tribe is very important. They need to believe the vision, and they need to want to jump on the train with you. For the senior leaders, they need to feel comfortable that you understand the client opportunity, what the revenue opportunity is, and how you're going to get there, time to market, how you're going to execute. And it's not how you're going to execute, as Georgie said. The quant tech, before they were very insular. Now I'm taking quants to talk to clients, so quant-to-quant meetings. They're very involved as well, presenting at conferences. They're involved in the business, so they feel part. If we make revenue, if we grow with clients, they feel part of the business. They're not in a lab, not going out externally. So that's how, and we also, when we innovate, we listen. We want to get their feedback. It's not draconian way of doing things. It's a team approach. And then at the trading voice trading, voice sales level, it's about automation. Electronification is something that's going to reduce operational risk, reduce manual workflows, frees them up to do higher value add, and that's the carrot that gets them on board.
The trust point is really important, and maybe there's a point of trust through failure, and we'll maybe come back to that.
Can I
Yes,
build
please
on
add,
something
Georgie.
that you both said? You talked about Formula One. You just said it takes time, and the risk piece. I think of when you were speaking, I thought of the iceberg analogy, because everyone sees the successes, the accomplishments, the visible. They don't see the time, the setbacks, the failures, the challenges, the defeats, the speed bumps, the sleepless nights. So there is something there about it. It takes time. To your point with McLaren, like it's a journey. No one arrives being the
Took them
championship.
7 years.
7 years.
To win
Yeah.
the team event. Yeah.
Yeah, and there may be a generational idea to change. Sometimes you need tech to just evolve over 10, 20, 30 years. Sometimes you need people to go away, where the natural left and right swipers are here, and the analog people go away. So there is a limitation to change sometimes to drive because of generational challenges. Now, Maurizio sits more in the capital markets institutional world. Mohammed sits across the bank and has a consumer, retail, all the way up to corporate. So when you think of that, that dynamic from your perspective on people, which is probably a bit different and maybe broader and even more challenging, it's quite eclectic when you think about how you drive change across Mashreq in your seat.
For sure. So let me start with the sponsorship from the top. Okay, because that's a very, very important cultural sponsor or cultural change. And just as an example, today, as I was driving, I was on a call with our CEO, and he said, "What are you doing on this call?" And I said, "Oh, we're developing a product." He says, "I don't want you here. I am the tribe leader, and I want tribe leads and squad leads just talking to me without any heads of function. So, lightly, can you please get off the call?" So he...
Do you want to send your resumes out?
No, it's okay.
You
It's not on the market yet. No, but what I'm saying is he is really sponsoring that innovation right from the top. And as he's using, he used to be head of corporate and institutional banking. So he wants to develop a product with the teams and less vendor, right? I mean, we talk about intrapreneurship. This is where you develop instead of an external party, you have the intrapreneur, and using the bank money instead of investing outside, we invest and develop the product to be able to sell it, right? So we all know in the Emirates, open finance is going to come very strong. The central bank is pushing hard on open finance. So as a bank, normally you're an LFI or a licensed financial institution, you're going to become a third-party provider to other people's data and integrate into multiple platforms. So if you're not ready for that, if you don't bring in new blood, new people, okay, I'm looking for a head of AI, for example, to come in my own team. I was talking to a 25-year-old data scientist. Where in a bank would you have been talking to a 25-year-old to be at the top table 3 years after graduation? But if we don't bring that talent in, I'm not going to have without age discrimination, 45, 50-year-old evangelizing on artificial intelligence and data science that is a, 15-year amplification, right?
Yeah, and there is a digital native element to,
Correct.
If you're not native, you can try to assimilate and immigrate, but the reality is you do need that base, they're born swiping.
Correct.
And that's kind of that. And David Cameron brought up the point on the importance of culture. And we'll also bring that back to the regulatory, which he also highlighted in that partnership model, which certainly ADGM has just absolutely nailed globally from my perspective, running around the world, working on these types of things. So really good points on culture and people, Mohammed, and the challenges of top-down, but that doesn't mean sometimes you get knocked out to flatten out even how things get done.
Correct.
I actually do the same thing. I'm very active down to our products, and I don't need my people around me. I can just interface direct, and that's really, it's efficient, it's fun, actually gets leadership to know what's going on without reporting up KPIs, which are not that easy.
Can I just say one thing with that?
Please, Georgie.
When you see organizations fail, it's often at the leadership, it's an echo chamber. The leader's idea is coming back to them, which is the important. You said new blood. getting that cognitive diversity, that difference of opinion, different perspective, which is so important.
Yeah, get the leader in the room direct, get the 25-year-old in the room, get off of Zoom, get the vibrations connecting in person, and it's a completely different dynamic. It's like understanding by observation versus experimentation, which is a big leap in humanity, et cetera. So just turning a bit to the regulatory framework, and I'll turn back to you, Maurizio. So regulation's a feature or a bug?
Look, at Bank of America, our mantra is responsible growth. So working with the regulators and with regulation is very important. I see it as market structure that you have to adapt to. So just like platforms, clients, they evolve and they change how they operate. We have to be ready to adapt, whether it's for clearing, whether it's for capital RWA, whether it's compliant communication. We think we just have to be ready to adapt. I don't see it as a, yes, it's costly, it's costly and it takes time, but it's part of the market structure and it's always going to be evolving.
Well, at a minimum, it's part of your moat.
Yeah.
It's really your lead, and it's beyond a feature. It's what you focus on, and then inside of that, you do what you can do. And from your perspective, Mohammed, it's quite different. Number one, it's a different environment than Bank of America, global and local. And there's some conservatism all over the world in regulation, no doubt. And I think there's even a conservatism in the Middle East sometimes in moving, but this does not feel conservative in the UAE specifically. And I know, you need real tech to make big change, and it's not that easy to have the platforms local and data sovereignty and clouds and all of that. But from your perspective on regs, how do you think about that, feature bug dynamic? Obviously, you have to be compliant,
Yeah.
but for you, it's a day-to-day, minute-to-minute, challenge or optimization.
Correct. So we operate in multi-regulatory environment. I can speak at least for UAE's extremely progressive, especially, for example, when data policies or GDPR in Europe, for example, and data was being sort of regulated here. The UAE made a draft policy and circulated that draft policy before a year and a half of making it pertinent for people to try it out, see how they can comply. And actually, the Minister of Data and AI sat with the Chamber of Commerce in order to get
And
back
that was done with real practical
that
tech, though.
feedback.
It was an
Yeah,
iterative.
yeah,
That's
they-
interesting, because there's
so-
a lot of consultations and regs, but they are all pre-implementation, so everybody's guessing and probably
No.
axed or
Yeah.
just not, or anxious.
No, in this case,
That's interesting.
It was put out to experiment with before it became policy. Cloud regulation, open banking, open finance. Again, there's a very hard push. Now, multi-regulation, you also have regulators that don't even have their cloud policy or their data policies out yet, right? So some are pushing the agenda to share data, open data, use cloud, but still, they don't want to go to that edge because the regulator's job is to protect consumer, right? And to do things at the right pace. So you don't want to innovate so much with the trust, right? And that treasury. That treasury has to be protected for that consumer. So you just have to deal with the multiple regulation and the multiple pace at the end of the day. And we need to help fintechs understand the regulation. A lot of times the fintech in a sandbox, everything works. But then you say, oh, but your data can't be on AWS, it has to be on premise or in a country, or then you lose those technologies. How can you innovate then? And so on and so forth. So it's
You would think with the word sand, that would be clear that it wasn't that stable, like
Yes.
drawing lines in sand.
correct.
All those types of things. So it's fascinating. So there's a real practical iteration between regs, and Price Singapore may be more similar there. The US has 1930s regulations that don't even contemplate computers, and Europe has a completely different framework for regulation, consultation, well before any practical implementation. So there's probably something in the middle of all of that, given history and us all wanting to move faster. And then there's the angle of globalization as well, right? You were Stanchart, so you can say we're just in our sandbox in our country. Clearly UAE and Abu Dhabi does not believe that. That's why this event is here, and that whole dynamic is playing out. So, Georgie, we've got a couple of minutes. You and I have talked a lot about leadership quality and failing and those types of things, and just how do you really drive innovation, create trust, and knowing it's not a 3 to 5 to 7 year game like all PowerPoints say when you hit the venture capital field. It's usually 3 to real, 5 to in the game, 10 to making a change, and 20 to disruption. Disruption cycles are much longer. So what have you learned from your, the leaders that you've been speaking to, for the last years, the ones that have actually achieved it?
Yeah, you said a minute ago, you used the word feature or a bug, and I think when we think about entrepreneurship, failure is a feature. And we were talking earlier about, and we used the Roger Federer analogy. He gave a wonderful commencement speech at Dartmouth where he said, in his 25 professional years as being a pro, he's played 1,500 games, won 80% of those, but lost 46% of those percentage points. And it's how, it's what the points you focus on and then how you bounce back from that. Because failure is a prerequisite for success. And it's not something to avoid, it's not something to dwell on, it's learn the lessons and move forward. And many of the leaders I work with, they talk about being incrementalists, raising the bar every day. And that's the, Lance Zugler, one of the leaders in the book, raising the bar. And that's his gold standard way of saying, every day we're going to get better, we're going to improve. And sometimes that means we will make mistakes. But it's what can we take we take away from that?
No, and it's like learning to ski, or Michael Jordan has said he remembers all of his missed shots, none of his made. It's maybe why gamblers don't go away from the table. The losses are very exhilarating. But if you take that exhilaration, turn it into an iteration, you wind up coming up with something better, and that's probably something people refer to as grit.
And I think at the start of the journey, there are many unknown unknowns. You've got, your your goal, but as you know better, you can do better. And therefore, once more information becomes available, that's when you iterate. And don't be afraid to course correct. I think sometimes people get so wedded to the plan that then they can lose sight of actually what is the goal they're trying to achieve.
So anything to close us out?
Yeah,
Mohammed?
maybe I just add on the iteration, fail smart, right? Take measure failure.
Fail fast.
Yeah. Well, fast and smart, right? Because fail fast, you can fall on your face. But you got to fail smart. You got to understand the risks. And don't forget, agile is important, but there are other projects and programs that need transformation. You asked me about transformation earlier. You do need the structure of transformation, and you do need the agility, right? I mean, it's really a balance. Similarly, innovate on the edge, bring into the core with a level of maturity so you can scale that product.
No, that's great. So Jack Welch, long vision, strategy clear, short execution. If you bring those three together with good teams, you'll win over time for sure. If you don't, you'll probably lose eventually, if not die immediately. Apologies for that ending. Thank you for the attention, and thank you to my panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.